The ongoing Israeli onslaught against the Gaza Strip enters its fifth day, bringing the death toll to 155. Tel Aviv comes under rocket fire yet again as Palestinian resistance groups continue to pound Israeli cities. UN Security Council calls for an immediate ceasefire between the Israelis and Palestinians. Hello there, you're watching Ali Tijah World News and I'm Fatima Basim. 5 days into an Israeli offensive against the besieged Gaza Strip, Israeli warplanes and warships intensified their attacks, raising the death toll to over 155. Around 1,000 people have been injured in Israeli assaults against Gaza, which have indiscriminately targeted residential buildings, mosques and even hospitals. In the latest attack, Israeli forces targeted a mosque in eastern Gaza, killing at least 15 people. According to local reports, the mosque was packed with worshippers at the time of the attacks. Since the early hours of Saturday, at least 45 Palestinians were killed in a series of airstrikes that pounded the Strip. Well, as is the case with all Israeli military operations against the Gaza Strip, Palestinian civilians are bearing the brunt of the Zionist brutality. And despite Israeli claims of the contrary, occupation forces are continuing to target the civilian infrastructure. 2 disabled women were killed and 4 others, including 2 children, seriously wounded after an Israeli jet struck a rehabilitation center in Gaza's Jabalia.
There were airstrikes on this place. This is a center to care for disabled. All the disabled people here cannot move. They are completely disabled.
Early this morning, the bodies of 2 women arrived to the hospital. One was born in 1983, the other in 1975. The first one arrived dismembered, and the other was charred and with a direct head wound as a result of an F-16 missile on the center they were located in.
I would like to ask the world one question. Has she ever fired rockets? They are handicapped. They hit them with a rocket. What wrong did they commit? What have these peaceful people committed?
The latest Israeli military operation is changing the landscape of the Gaza Strip. This minaret is still standing, but the mosque lies in ruins. A collection of the Holy Quran is still there, but there are no worshippers to recite it. In another corner of Gaza's Jabalia, a little boy and his sister have left their toys in what used to be their house. Now it is completely destroyed. And contrary to Israeli claims, there is no trace of Hamas rockets here. Gaza's hospitals are flooded with injured children, who make up half of the casualty figures. Their cries of pain are hard to miss. In Beit Lahia, in the northern part of the Strip, a charity for the disabled was bombed. 2 were killed on the spot, and a 3rd body was later recovered. The injured, mostly children, were rushed into life-saving surgeries.
These are the targets of Benjamin Netanyahu. These are remains of children. These are dolls for children. They are children in an organization for disabled.
Under the cover of eliminating the resistance and its military capabilities, the Zionists have indiscriminately pounded religious and civilian sites, further highlighting the method of collective punishment which the Israelis employ and the subsequent massacres that always follow.
Meanwhile, Egypt has opened the Rafah border crossing with Gaza to allow ambulances ferrying wounded Palestinians to enter the country. The Rafah border crossing with Gaza had been largely sealed since the July 2013 ouster of Egypt's President Mohamed Morsi. 500 tons of food and medical supplies will also be allowed to enter the enclave. Been met with retaliatory counterattacks by the Palestinian resistance factions. Resistance groups fired a dozen rockets towards Tel Aviv, 10 of which struck the city. Deserted streets and sirens wailing. Well, this was the scene in Tel Aviv as those rockets appeared overhead. There were no immediate reports of casualties. Now, that attack followed an announcement by Hamas's armed wing Al-Qassam brigades, which vowed to strike the Israeli city at 9 p.m. local time. Earlier in the day, reports said that at least one Israeli soldier was killed, while 3 others were injured in separate attacks. The number of rockets fired from the Gaza Strip has topped 70. Let's now cross over to Balsam Al-Atrash, who is standing by for us in Gaza. Balsam, give us a sense of what the situation is like at the moment.
Yes, another massacre had just occurred to add to the list of massacres by the Israeli occupation warplanes. 15 Palestinians were just killed and 40 injured so far in an airstrike, an Israeli occupation airstrike that targeted a mosque east of Gaza. The Palestinians were praying Taraweeh prayers when the Israeli occupation warplane hit the mosque and the houses next to the mosque as well, leaving 15 killed so far and 40 injured. They are still removing the civilians from under the rubble of the buildings. So far, they only counted 15 and 40 injured. Gaza streets are angry of this massacre. The building was completely torn down and the mosque was severely damaged. Now, even the houses of God and worship are being attacked. Also, today afternoon, Al-Faruq Mosque had been totally destroyed by the Israeli warplanes. Till now, the Israeli warplanes had attacked or hit around 23 mosques in Gaza and around 18 schools and more than 200 homes. The Israeli attacked Center for Disabled Children, mosques, homes, hospitals, even civilian houses. Actually, people are wondering what has it had left to target. All Gaza is being targeted. The latest news here is that Israel had announced a ceasefire, humanitarian ceasefire for around 12 hours for Palestinians to evacuate complete neighborhoods so the Israelis can bomb the entire neighborhoods completely. Now, the Palestinians here, this news was just announced about 15 minutes ago. Some local Palestinian media websites confirmed the news. Also that Israelis had through leaflets and flyers from warplanes in the north telling the people to evacuate since they are going to be bombing and shelling complete neighborhoods. There is nothing left more. Everything here indicates massacres. All the Israeli warplanes are committing are just simply massacres.
Well, let's now look at some footage live from Tel Aviv, where moments ago the city was hit by a barrage of rockets from the Palestinian resistance. Balsam, tell us more about these attacks. Is there more to come from the Palestinian resistance?
Yes, it seems like the Palestinians wanted to pay back what the Israelis do to the Palestinians when they strike their homes, and the Israeli targets, they basically warn the Palestinians with a warning rocket. They call it a warning rocket, where they hit the home with a small rocket, and then they give them about 2 to 3 minutes to evacuate, and then hit the home again with the F-16 rocket. Now the Palestinians wanted to pay back and started around after Iftar, released a statement and a videotape on TV and other media and internet and other media communication, saying that the Qassam brigades and the resistance group will hit Tel Aviv on 9 p.m. this evening with a new rocket called Jabari 80. This rocket was named after the Hamas militant leader al-Jabari, who was killed in 2012 war. So Palestinians felt joy with this news and started actually to wait anxiously for the barrage of rockets. Hamas, or let's say the resistance group, kept their promise, and about a few minutes after 9 o'clock, there was a volley of rockets that fell on Tel Aviv. Around 10 rockets called J-80 fell on Tel Aviv, leaving a state of panic there. Also, there was news saying that an Israeli civilian had died from a heart attack from those rockets. That's what maybe led the Israelis to announce that they are starting to evacuate neighborhoods to bomb it. But at the same time, the Palestinians had retaliated with this kind of rockets. Right now, there are sirens sounded and heard in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, along with explosions as well.
Yes, and let's talk more about what's going on in Gaza. Has the international humanitarian aid been able to reach the Gaza Strip, given that it is besieged and the border crossing there is not a lot of access going through the border?
True. The access is really limited. The Israeli warplanes are targeting even civilians walking or gathering in the streets. Also, the borders are being shelled with the Israeli tanks on the borders. And from the sea, there are the warships targeting the Palestinian people. Access for the humanitarian aids and help is really limited. Also, there was targeting for ambulances before and medical teams. And yesterday there was targeting to doctors, where a Palestinian doctor was killed after his home, and another Palestinian pharmacist was killed after their home was targeted by Israeli occupation warplanes. This indicates that the humanitarian crisis here is collapsing, and the situation is exaggerating a lot. The medical teams there is difficulty even reaching the places. There's something else to mention: fuel in Gaza. Also, there is a shortage in fuel for even the vehicles to move to these locations and help the injuries, the wounded, and the Palestinians.
All right, Bassam Al-Atrash, our Gaza correspondent, thank you for those updates. For its part, the UN Security Council has called for a ceasefire between the Israelis and the Palestinians. A council statement approved by all 15 members calls for the de-escalation of the violence, restoration of calm, and a resumption of direct negotiations between the two sides. The press statement expresses serious concern regarding the crisis related to Gaza and the protection and welfare of civilians on both sides.
The immediate objective before us, and also on the basis of this position by the Security Council, is to have an immediate ceasefire. That is the immediate objective. If the Israeli aggressors stop the military operations against our people, then it means the effort of the Security Council and the effort of all the political groups who were outraged when we had so many emergency meetings yesterday for the Arab Group, for the OIC, for NAM, in which many ambassadors expressed outrage for the way the Security Council was dragging its feet in not responding to this situation threatening international peace and security. So therefore, because of that situation, I think the international community is ready. If the Israeli side is not going to listen to this position from the Security Council and from all the political groups, there will be more activities, including in the Security Council, including the possibility of draft resolution to be put for acting on it. All these options are available to us, but we are not there yet. We have to see if the Israeli side to listen to the decision of the Security Council. Thank you very much.
Human rights activist Harry Fair is with us now to discuss this issue further. Harry, is the Palestinian resistance going to agree to a ceasefire? Won't it be conceding to another Israeli aggression?
Well, if the Palestinian groups agree to a ceasefire, is that a concession? It depends on what terms the ceasefire comes about. If it comes about on American pressure and Israel suddenly saying it wants a ceasefire, and the Palestinian groups being the last ones to talk about wanting a ceasefire, then in that sense it would be a concession. But at the moment, over 150 Palestinians, none of those civilians. That is one of the critical factors in thinking about a ceasefire, frankly.
All right, thank you for speaking to Ali Tija, Harry Fair, human rights activist. Staying with that conflict in Gaza, and thousands have rallied in cities across the globe in solidarity with the residents of the besieged coastal strip. Mohsen Abbas attended one such rally in London and sent us this report.
While the Israeli Prime Minister continues to reject calls for a ceasefire, Jews in Britain joined the thousands of outraged demonstrators in London to voice their anger against the bombing of Gazans.
We had a demonstration like many other Jewish people around the world who is demonstrating on this day, and even inside in the occupied Palestine there is many Jewish people demonstrating today what's happening in the situation, what's happening into Gaza, and to shout to the world that this war is not about rockets from Gaza. This war is about occupying a land. This war is about they want to control the Gaza Strip. And this is all what they're doing this in the name of Judaism. And we came to spread the message that this is not in the name of the Jewish people. This is a disgust. Israel is a terrorist state. They do not represent Jewish people alike.
The overt pretext for the military onslaught was the death of 3 Israeli youths. But analysts say Israel's real motive is to secure Gaza's newfound gas reserves, which are said to be worth billions of dollars. A fact which even the Israeli Defense Force itself has already admitted.
The collective punishment of the people of Gaza by Israeli bombing has got worse and worse. There are many, many deaths, including those of children, and Israel is now threatening a land invasion, as well as the continued occupation of the West Bank and the building of settlements on Palestinian land, taking water supplies and other things. The occupation has got to stop, the siege has got to stop, the bombardment has got to stop.
Over 100 Gazans have been killed in a week. 20 of them were children, and over 400 more have been injured so far. The scale and intensity of the bombings indicates that Israel wants to break Hamas.
Well, I think the government, what they should be doing is first of all looking at this case by case, and they can see what's happening to the people of Gaza, and they can see exactly what Israel is doing. And if they don't actually see the truth in front of them, then obviously they've got serious issues. As a government, they need to go back to the board and they need to seriously address this to the wider public. And the public, that's why as a public we need to come out and make the noise. Otherwise they're not going to listen to us, and this is what we're here for them to listen to our words and what we plan to say.
Israel is clearly taking advantage of the turmoil in the Middle East and trying to militarily subjugate Palestinian resistance to its apartheid policies. It's not yet clear how this round of Israeli violence will end, but the protests against it are certain to increase here in London. Well, there's been a huge turnout outside the Israeli embassy here in London. Over 100 Palestinians have been killed in the space of 1 week, and 20 of those have been children. The Muslims and non-Muslims who've arrived outside the Israeli embassy are actually livid and are demanding that David Cameron stop supporting Israel immediately. Mohsin Abbas, AEE TV, London.
Iraqi forces and tribal fighters have beaten back a fresh assault by extremist militants on the town of Haditha. The attack on Haditha, northwest of the capital Baghdad, left 13 militants and 4 police officers dead. Battles also erupted in the central province of Diyala as security forces fought back against Islamist militants and pushed to retake militant-held areas north of Muqdadiyah, a town on the main road leading to the provincial capital of Baquba. Meanwhile, the army launched a massive campaign to retake the town of Jarf al-Sakhr, with reports of heavy clashes on the outskirts of the town. Well, as Kurdish Peshmerga forces continue to seize more oil fields in Iraq's northern city of Kirkuk, many fear that tensions between Erbil and Baghdad will escalate further. Our correspondent in Iraq, Wissam al-Bayati, has that story.
In many occasions during the last decade, the Kurdish politicians have shown ambitions to take over the oil-rich city of Kirkuk to seal Kurdistan's economy weak point and to eliminate the need to its share from the oil revenues which comes from the central government. In the midst of the central government's war against terror, which occupied more than 25% of Iraq's territories, the Kurdish forces or Peshmerga imposed its control on the so-called disputed areas in Kirkuk, Diyala and Mosul provinces, under the pretext of protecting the residents of these provinces. The local authorities in the province of Kirkuk welcomed the presence of the Peshmerga on its territories. Furthermore, Kirkuk's governor has given the green light to the Peshmerga to occupy all oil fields in the city of Kirkuk and fortify their posts inside the city. The Kurdish commanders stated that their presence in and around the city is aimed at protecting the people, but at the same time they stressed that they have received clear orders from the Kurdish President Masoud Barzani to hold their positions and denied any intention to retreat.
Our main mission is to maintain the security for the residents of Kirkuk against any terrorist aggression. Our orders are to stay in our newly regained posts, and no orders were given for future plans to retreat.
Many other officers have criticized the Iraqi army's withdrawal from Kirkuk province, saying that Iraq's military move forced them to enter the city, therefore they will not allow the Iraqi army to enter, stressing that they will protect the residents regardless to their ethnicity, sects, and religious affiliations.
The withdrawal of the Iraqi army has created a security vacuum, and our presence is based on protecting the people regardless to their ethnic, sects, and religious affiliations. The Iraqi army will not be permitted to come back, and we will do our best to prevent their return.
Many political experts have predicted that the current engulfed political security situation may turn the current military standoff into a military confrontation between Baghdad and Erbil, and warned of the consequence of such action.
According to the Peshmerga commanders, the Peshmerga will be ready for any counteroffensive made by ISIS, and they will do their best to protect the oil-rich city of Kirkuk. Wissam al-Bayati, Al-Ittijah, from the front line between Kirkuk and Al-Rashad.
Well, earlier we were joined by Wissam from that front line in Kirkuk.
This bridge is Al-Rashad Bridge, and it's considered the first bridge which links between Kirkuk and the Rashad and Hawija districts. This is the last soldier from the Peshmerga which protects the city of Kirkuk. The Peshmerga today are heavily deployed in this area, and more than 3,000 of them have been deployed to protect the city of Kirkuk and to protect the components, according to the top security leaders here, no matter of the nationality, as being Arab, Turkmen, Kurd. They are all protected by the Peshmerga in this place. According to the top security leaders, the ISIS militants are on the other side from the river, and they are still operative, and they're operating and killing more people over there. But according to the top security leaders, they say that no more or no further information comes from the other side, from the city of Rashad and Hawija. According to the top officers, they say that the province of Kirkuk is considered one of the top priority for the military operations for the Peshmerga. Therefore, the Peshmerga have been heavily deployed here for one reason, which is protecting the city of Kirkuk. Wissam Beati, Al-Ittijah, Kirkuk.
After seizing 2 oil fields in Iraq's northern city of Kirkuk, the Kurdistan regional government is planning to add these lucrative reserves to its oil exports. Rahab Rikabi has that story.
Iraqi semi-autonomous Kurdistan is increasing its autonomy after seizing control over Iraq's northern oil resources of Bai Hassan and Mahmour oil fields, amid a growing dispute with the government in Baghdad. Just a month after Kurdish Peshmerga moved into the oil-rich city of Kirkuk, simultaneously with the Islamic State militant offensive on northwestern Iraq. The Kurdish regional government has earlier outlined its plans to boost its anti-constitutional oil exports by including the oil fields it seized in and around Kirkuk, and observers say that Turkey will play a broader role in selling the oil to the world markets.
After playing an important role in the conspiracy in Mosul, the KRG is taking advantage from Kirkuk's oil fields to expand its oil exports of crude oil from Erbil via Turkey or even Syrian ports to the global markets.
Kurdistan region is illegally trucking oil to Turkey, Afghanistan and countries in Central Asia. Moreover, Iraqi oil ministry officials say that Israeli and U.S. oil refineries had joined the growing list of customers for crude from Iraqi Kurdistan via Turkey, bypassing Baghdad. At least 4 cargoes laden with Kurdish crude went to Israel since the start of this year. Yet, officials in Erbil refuted the Kurdish crude being sold directly or indirectly to such destinations. Experts argue that the stakes are high as Kurdistan's independent oil sales allow it to receive income outside Baghdad's budget, pushing it towards even greater autonomy.
The Kurds have moved half the distance towards financial and economic independency from Baghdad's annual budget, as the outcomes of Kirkuk natural resources will exceed Kurdistan's 70%, which comes from the central government.
Today, reports confirmed that $93 million in Kurdish oil revenues had been deposited in Kurdish regional government accounts in Turkey's state-run Halk Bank. Erbil has been locked in a bitter struggle with Baghdad that says the Kurdish oil sales are illegal and accuses Kurdistan regional government of harboring extremist militants which have swept into large territories of the country since June 10th, with the purpose of expanding its control over more territories and oil fields and swiftly ramping up oil exports independently from the Islamic State embattled central government. The KRG, however, dismissed Baghdad's claims. Rahab Rikabi, Al-Ittijah, Baghdad.
This is calls by Kurdish leader Masoud Barzani to hold an independence referendum earlier this month have been condemned by both regional and Kurdish factions who fear Iraqi disunity. Mustafa Al-Khattan has more for us from Baghdad.
Earlier this month, the KRG President Masoud Barzani attended a parliamentary session in Kurdistan and urged Kurdish lawmakers to establish an electoral commission as a preparation to hold a referendum to decide the independency of Kurdistan. The central government made a quick reaction by opposing the call and described it as a clear violation to the Iraqi constitution. Many regional countries shared the reaction of the Iraqi government, despite being considered as the strongest ally to the Kurds internationally. The US administration has emphasized its opposition to Barzani's statements. Other Kurdish parties have played key role to limit the impact of Barzani's remarks, saying it represents his own and his political party interests, and does not represent other political parties and the Kurdish nation. Moreover, they believe it will ruin the Kurdish legitimate case in the future.
There is an American pressure on Mr. Barzani to give up his demands alongside with other Kurdish parties who strongly oppose the idea of disintegration. They see their future is with Iraq as a whole, and they believe they will face economical and social crises if they split up from Iraq.
Similar stances have been taken by regional countries like Egypt, Turkey and Iran, who loudly voiced their opposition towards any attempt to divide Iraq, saying that it will provoke other countries to carve up to small states. Observers said that Iraq is in a cruel confrontation with terrorism which jeopardizes its unity. Now it's the best time to show cohesion from all its components towards the growing militancy.
The Iraqi people and politicians need to be united, especially at this very critical situation, and the latest statements made by the head of KRG will do nothing but to make the government more vulnerable and disabled to tackle the current challenges.
Recently, Kurdish parliamentary and ministerial members have suspended all government activities after Iraqi premier accused the Kurds of sheltering terrorist leaders in Erbil. The latest tensions between Baghdad and Erbil may paralyze the political process, and many expect the next parliamentary session will not witness any marvel results.
According to political experts, officials in Baghdad and Erbil need to have reciprocal agreement to shun the skimpy and irresponsible statements, which will do nothing but to widen the gap between the two sides in a time that the country is in dire need to unite against terrorism. Mustafa Qattan, AEE, Baghdad.
Egypt's foreign minister visited Iraq, signalling a warming in relations between Cairo and Baghdad. Our correspondent reports now on how the growing threat from militant groups has become one of Cairo's main concerns.
The recent visit by Egypt's Foreign Minister Sameh Shukri to Iraq signals an improvement in relations between the two countries. Shukri conveyed a message from Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi that reiterated Cairo's call for the formation of a government in Baghdad, which would address the threats posed by both terrorism and separatism. Earlier this month, Sisi warned against the partitioning of Iraq, saying that it would be a catastrophe. But the dominant issue of common interest between the two sides is the threat posed by radical Islamist groups like the so-called Islamic State militants have carved up parts of northwestern Iraq in recent weeks, while its affiliates threaten regional governments, including Egypt's secular leadership.
The support that President Sisi is giving to Iraq is quite important and vital. It's not only for Iraq, it will affect the whole Middle East region, because terrorism is not located only in Iraq. It's located worldwide, and specifically is existent in the Middle East with support of certain superpowers and Arab countries, unfortunately.
Egypt is the Arab world's leading country, and it's our duty to provide Iraq and other Arab neighbors with political intelligence and logistic aid.
During a meeting with the Iraqi Premier Nour al-Maliki, Shukri stressed on the importance of forming an alliance against terrorism and pledged Egypt's support to the Iraqi nation. A public sense of optimism over the progress in the Egyptian-Iraqi relations, as the majority of Egyptians assured on the importance of Iraq as a strategic ally and a loyal neighbor. Reporting for AEE TV from Cairo, Karim Azzuddin.
You're watching AEE World News, still to come. Afghanistan's presidential hopefuls agree to a full audit of June's runoff vote. Welcome back to Ali Tijah World News. The EU has announced that it has added the names of 11 pro-Russian leaders in eastern Ukraine on its list of sanctions. This brings up the total number of Ukrainian and Russian figures slammed by EU sanctions to 72, which will include the freezing of assets and denial of entry into the European Union. And after 23 Ukrainian servicemen were killed in the east of the country by pro-Russian activists, Kiev ordered an aerial attack on the seceded regions of Lugansk and Donetsk, causing casualties among civilians.
If these walls could speak, they would retell the stories these pro-Russian Ukrainians living in the east narrated. This is the town of Mariinka, which was heavily bombarded by the Ukrainian Air Force in retaliation for the killing of 23 servicemen with rockets fired by pro-Russian activists. For many, Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko is making civilians pay the price for refusing to surrender to Kiev.
At night, the Ukrainian army fired from multiple rocket complexes, Grad and Uragan. Most rockets hit industrial enterprises and residential areas in Mariinka. Squares have been shelled as well. According to the information obtained 1 hour ago, more than 30 civilians have been killed.
Ukraine's Security Council has claimed that hundreds of armed fighters were killed during Friday's air raids.
Yesterday, Ukrainian Air Force delivered 5 targeted but powerful airstrikes on terrorist strongholds. Their mortar and firing positions and rebel camps in Luhansk and Donetsk regions. According to preliminary information, airstrikes by Ukrainian pilots destroyed around 500 rebels and damaged 2 armored personnel carriers.
Residents' version of the story seems to have another angle, as they say at least 3 people were killed in the attacks.
The shelling started at 7 p.m. yesterday. Taxis were parked here. First one bomb, then another. The Ukrainian army targeted the military registration office, which I've heard is the headquarters of the rebel recruitment. So they hit this area. There was a car driving there. A woman inside was killed instantly and the car caught fire.
Ukrainian troops were mobilized in the east to quell an anti-Kiev movement, thinking the battle would end in their advantage. But the separatists have shown resilience and willingness to fight for their demands.
Let's now speak to political analyst Chris Bambury. Mr. Bambury, is Kiev stalling a peace plan to establish as much ground as possible?
I don't see any peace plan coming from Kiev at the moment. What I see is the Kiev building up their conventional military forces, which the rebels can't match simply because they don't have the heavy weaponry that warplanes have been provided by the West. And what Poroshenko has promised is that for every Ukrainian killed, he says scores of rebels will be killed. So there's a disproportion between the two sides, with the Ukrainians using heavy weaponry and the rebels lighter weaponry. And that means that we're going to see, despite talk of, I'm sure, precision airstrikes, growing numbers of civilian casualties. So therefore, in a conventional terms, I think the rebels are now on the back foot because the Ukrainians have the advantage in terms of the weaponry you've just seen in your package. But I don't think that's going to bring peace. Ukraine has a history of guerrilla warfare, and I suspect we're going to see, even if the rebels cannot hold the cities which they are now in possession of, they will continue to fight a guerrilla war. So I don't see peace coming. I don't see peace coming from Poroshenko with his boasts that scores will die for every Ukrainian. The Russians aren't going to provide the rebels with air cover or heavy weaponry. They are, however, saying they want to resume talks at the United Nations, and I would say that's the only possibility of peace, is if we can get negotiations which were broken in Geneva, but get those negotiations back on track. Otherwise, we're going to see mounting civilian casualties of the sort you've just reported in eastern Ukraine.
Yes, and was the relocation of Donetsk and Luhansk by pro-Russian fighters the right move, or was it a sign that they will soon lose more ground?
I think they had probably, as they see it, no choice, but it's clear that they cannot match the Ukrainian forces in terms of heavy artillery and airstrikes, which is now what we're seeing. And without help from Russia, which does not look like it's going to be forthcoming, they will be forced, I think, to give up trying to hold static positions. No guerrilla army can do that against a conventional military. But they can, as I say, fight a guerrilla war. And I also mentioned Ukraine has a very recent history of guerrilla warfare in the 1920s and during the Second World War. And therefore there is a possibility of this becoming an extended conflict. The biggest losers will be, and watching the package now, will be exactly those civilians killed in their houses by airstrikes, which we hear are targeting definite military targets, but are not, as we see in Gaza. Always this claim of precision airstrikes. So I think there's a disproportionate element here in the conflict which will grow, but it is not going to be a Ukrainian easy victory because the rebels are not going to give up their struggle and will continue. And that's why I hope, as I say, the path to negotiations can be opened through the Russian approach to the United Nations.
Is President Poroshenko acting alone in this, or is the West pressuring him to take any measures necessary to retake eastern parts of Ukraine?
I think it's a very good question because I think Western policy regarding Ukraine has been essentially cack-handed. They've been bumbling around. They started this by promising EU membership to Ukraine, which is not going to be forthcoming. They're only going to get associate membership. They've promised NATO is backing up. We've had Western military, American military maneuvers, Western forces. And yet there's no taste in the West for actually getting involved in this fighting. So this is a situation where the West will provide training and weapons to the Ukrainians in order to carry out these killings, but want to keep their hands clean. And it's rather hypocritical that they are backing them up with that weaponry, but then not prepared to get involved. And all the time blaming the Russians. So the sanctions we see are completely one-sided. There is no evidence, as we know, of the Russian involvement in this fighting. If the Russians were involved, Ukrainian warplanes would not be able to carry out those strikes because the Russians are more powerful. The Russians would provide heavy artillery and so on. There is none of that. So why the EU are ramping up sanctions now when it's clearly the Russians are not involved and are trying to get peace talks back on track is a good question. I think most people looking at Western policy think they are blundering around in Ukraine, making things worse with every move.
Do you think President Putin's inaction in eastern Ukraine will soon backfire against him? With the increasing number of casualties in eastern Ukraine, people there were hoping that Putin would be more involved in solving the crisis.
Well, I'm not sure there's a fantastic taste in Russia for getting involved directly in this conflict, and Putin has his own difficulties. But also there is a very strong nationalist element in Russian politics, as we know. And the sight of these airstrikes on Russian population, the watching people, reporting the death of a woman driving past, killed by a warplane, is definitely going to ramp up pressure on Putin to deliver the sort of support that the rebels will be demanding. I think at the moment he does not want to do that. He does not want to get involved in a war with the West, so he's standing back. He'll be looking at other ways of applying pressure, economic pressure on Ukraine through oil and gas supplies and everywhere. And remember, the Ukrainian economy is essentially a basket case, so it's very vulnerable to any sanctions which the Russians could put on it. So potentially Putin has other weapons in his arsenal without getting involved in this conflict. But there will be increasing pressure from nationalist circles in Russia to provide backup for these rebels. And of course, that will be an escalation of the conflict. But there again, Poroshenko has escalated this dramatically with these airstrikes and artillery attacks on these cities.
All right, political analyst Chris Bambury, thank you for speaking to Ali Tija. The US Secretary of State John Kerry announced that the two candidates in Afghanistan's disputed presidential runoff have agreed to a full audit of every single ballot cast in the vote. Earlier, Kerry had extended his stay in Afghanistan in a bid to broker a deal between the country's rival presidential candidates.
So let me outline very briefly, so you can hear from the candidates and from Yanukovych, what has been agreed in our meetings yesterday and today. First, with respect to the election, both candidates have committed to participate in and abide by the results of the largest, most comprehensive possible audit. Every single ballot that was cast will be audited, 100%, all 8 million.
The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry appears to be scrambling to produce a deal aimed at resolving Afghanistan's latest political crisis. Kerry is holding meetings for a second straight day with the country's two presidential candidates, Abdullah Abdullah and Ashraf Ghani, as well as incumbent President Hamid Karzai. Abdullah and Ghani both claim victory in the country's presidential runoff, which is threatening Afghanistan's first democratic transfer of power. Discussions between Kerry and the Afghan parties have so far focused on the technical details of the election process and the scope of an audit of the votes that would be acceptable to both sides. U.S. officials, however, declined to elaborate on the possibility of a unity government, an idea both candidates have rejected. Washington's concern with the political turmoil in Afghanistan is likely to be the direct result of a lack of cooperation by the previous Karzai administration, especially with regard to the so-called bilateral security agreement, which would allow U.S. troops to remain in the country after the NATO withdrawal. Karzai has refused to sign the agreement, causing outright resentment in Washington. The current political paralysis in Afghanistan is threatening to fracture both the government and state. And while the opposing camps scramble for power, the Americans will be looking to install the man best suited for future military cooperation.
Here's a reminder of our top stories. The ongoing Israeli onslaught against the Gaza Strip enters its fifth day, bringing the death toll to 155. Tel Aviv comes under rocket fire yet again as Palestinian resistance groups continue to pound Israeli cities. And the UN Security Council calls for an immediate ceasefire between the Israelis and Palestinians. Well, that's all from me and the Al Hijah News team. Thank you for watching and good night.